All right, so let's keep the dream alive here. Keep on trucking. Now that we've covered some basics, I think that we can have more meaningful conversations. And if not, then I've dropped the ball somewhere. So let's go ahead and jump into this first domain. And for you guys online, you can log on to Cyber Ninja and get the slides out there. For you guys in person, you should have them in front of you here. And if you want to stop by the office here, if you're online, we can leave a copy of the books. We do have them now, not only the book, but the workbook as well. So feel free to do that. Make sure we're here first before coming. Let's jump in and talk a little bit about this risk management domain and just have hopefully meaningful conversations on this. So insecurity and risk, there is so many different job functions that we can, as security professionals, get into. There's controls, adding controls, there's building mechanisms or components, there's tying systems into each other, there's putting safeguards in place, and helping people realize what those technologies are or what those methodologies are, maybe the processes that you bring along with you, is super important. And so we mentioned these earlier, the confidentiality, the integrity, and the availability of some of these things. And it really helps us get into how do we want to manage our environment. Really what it comes down to is this word up top here, because it's more than just, coming out and learning a bunch of terms. It's more about how are we going to govern security within our organization. Do we have a strategy? What goals do we have? Do they support the customer's mission? Does it have an objective? If so, do we have some sort of way that we can tell management and potentially give them an ROI or a business case for what we're trying to pitch to them? And does that business case lead back to somehow us getting it paid by a customer, or do we have to eat that on overhead? Because that's a big deal. And that's directly correlated to budget, as well as who do you have on staff. And I know for you guys that work for the bigger companies, you can dip into the resources, but a lot of times for small businesses, the resources, trying to find the right people to do the right thing at the right time, oftentimes can be quite difficult. And so strategically, the idea of governing security needs to align with these components. And anytime we get into trying to meet those goals, we need to also make sure we're keeping money on our mind. And because of that, it can be quite tricky sometimes. So one of the things that you're definitely going to see on your exam are the different ways for us to enforce security management. And it begins with this slide right here. So let's talk about this real quick. Bring it up. So fundamentally, there is a difference between policies, the standards, baselines, guidelines, and procedures. And you will more than likely see at least one question, if not more, of these on your exam. So let's go through and try to define each one of these if we can. So in your book, in domain 1, there's a section on security policy. And it says that it's an overall general statement produced by senior management that dictates what role security plays within an organization. So an overall general statement, right, which is probably consistent with what you guys have for policies. So this is a general statement at a high level. And it can be decomposed in a number of different ways, right? We can have an organizational policy. We can have a issue specific policy. Or we can have a system specific policy. So these are, just three of the examples here that, depending on what your strategy is, what your mission, your objectives, your goals are, really could align with these policies. A lot of times you hear, or at least I hear people say that you can't enforce something that's not written in a policy. And having worked at a few large businesses and some small businesses in the past, if you don't have it written down, then how could you potentially reprimand somebody? And so a lot of times what we'll try to do is organizationally within the policy development is come up with a bunch of different things. And specifically, how can they align to business objectives? That kind of looks weird with my eyes there, those two colors together, but whatever. It needs to be easy to understand and in plain English. Because if one of your employees can't read it, then there is some liberal meaning to it to be able to maybe get them out of trouble. Now, as you start to evolve as an organization, even some of the issue or the system specific ones begin to change with you as well. And what do I mean by that? Well, think about, with some of the policies that you guys may have with your organization, like let's say for social media, for instance, as new social media outlets come out, there's probably a need for businesses to take a look at some of those policies to see what's prudent for people to post and what is not online on your own personal social media accounts. So they can get very specific, either to systems or to issues, but also we can have typically, what we typically will see with policies at a high level is we'll see what's called an AUP, an acceptable use policy. And a lot of times people just see that and they'll read it maybe the first time, but then, if it's a AUP on your laptop that splashes every day through, group policy or whatever needs to happen to make you read it every day, a lot of people just click accept. But if you actually peruse through that and read the words, it tells you, hey, we're going to be monitoring everything you're doing, and you pretty much don't have any rights while you're using our network. And if you click the OK button, then you're agreeing to everything. And that's really a way that you can tell employees that, hey, everything you do while you're on our network is in fact going to be monitored. And that way, if there is some sort of liability or issue that does come to fruition, we can typically follow it up with, hey, you signed that AUP, or maybe in the employee handbook, we go back to the policies that are in there. But these can be these policies can be put into a couple or three different buckets here. So with policies, for instance, if we go back here, with policies, we can pop these into three different buckets. And usually they are regulatory, like, do we have to do something to become compliant? with something like, DFARS or the new CMMC that's coming out, maybe Hipaa or Sarbanes-Oxley, PCI DSS if you're taking people's credit card information online. There are advisory policies that are out there, and those are typically, like we just talked about, that acceptable use policy basically tells or strongly encourages employees to what types of behavior they can do while they're doing business with you. And so those are advisory. Typically, it'll also have some sort of ramifications that if the employee violates, then not only are you going to get your hand smacked, but you may be terminated if it's usually it takes more than one. Unless, I know at a couple of places that I've worked in the past, and maybe you guys have the same sort of thing, there is a zero tolerance policy for certain things as well. So you can have that as an issue specific type of policy. Like if you're surfing porn, for instance, while you're at work. I've actually had at 2 places that I've worked in the past, there's been 2 men that have been let go because of that. And then finally here, this informative type of policy that, just like the word implies, it informs employees of specific topics. Now, that could be, how do you interact with potential partners, or, the reporting structure, or what have you, within your organization. So typically those are the 3 different types: the regulatory, the advisory, and the informative are the 3 different types of policies that we see. And there is a fantastic chance that you will see policies show up on your exam. So I think that generally speaking, people typically will have an idea of what a policy is. But if not, you can come back and watch this video to get you where you need to be. Those are typically what we see for policies. Okay? You will see policies on your exam. All right. There's another one here that is pretty important that we're going to talk about. Let's change the color here. And that is the standards. Standards usually refer to, let me write it down here. The standard usually refers to any actions, activities, or rules, actions or rules, and that help us achieve our mission, but also give backing to a policy. They back the policy. And so we can lean on maybe like an organizational standard that requires all people that work with us to have business casual, or maybe everybody must be showing their badge on their lanyard and not down on their belt, or what are some of those specific types of standards. Confidential information must be protected with, in this case, the reference that we have here, AES 256 in rest and in transit. That's a pretty specific type of standard to be followed in that particular meeting. And why is that important? Well, in your book, there's actually a pretty neat little slide here that you could go and look at that looks similar to this right here, where if you have a security policy, the security policy is strategic. There may be some mandatory standards that you have to follow. We're going to talk about guidelines and baselines as well as procedures, but really kind of the trickle down effect here from top to bottom, where the policy establishes the strategic goals, the strategic plans, and then all the lower elements provide the tactical support to back those up. And that's really where that comes into play there. And so usually I think that standards are typically a way that people understand what is going on, and usually like the International Standards Organization or the ISO is something that typically we'll see in business practice, the standards organization. Like if we want to figure out how something is typically done, we'll go out and look at a standard. And so that's typically what we see for standard. Whereas the next one here is the baseline. And this is a great topic. If you're not familiar with this, then let's go ahead and discuss that a little bit. So baselines, typically, these refer to points in time that is used for comparison. For any future change. And because of that, these baselines come in very, very handy. Usually you'll hear people talk about a delta. They'll draw a little triangle. They'll talk about a delta. But we also can, for baselines, and we'll talk about this in and when we talk about architecture and design, the baseline also allows us to conform to what typically people in our business say, a minimum level of protection. That could be the baseline. Hey, if you're going to do business, you got to have at least this right here. And for instance, if you have an accounting system, one of the topics that we're going to be talking about throughout the remainder of the week is this thing that's called the EAL level, Enterprise Assurance Level, and the evaluation. I think I saw enterprise here. Sorry, evaluation assurance level, and this evaluation assurance level is a way that people can establish, like for an accounting system, you must have a level 4 in order for it to be accepted baseline for systems going through the EAL, and specifically the common criteria, which you may have heard of before. And we're going to go through that later on. So common criteria has all these things that are called the evaluation assurance levels. And in some industries, there's a baseline that's associated with that EAL level. And so it's a minimum level of protection. That's usually what we'll look at. So if I'm coming in and auditing someone on, let's say, an accounting system, what I'm going to do is I'm going to take that baseline and I'm going to use that baseline, the minimum level of assurance, and I'm going to compare it to what they have. And based off of what they have, if it doesn't match that minimum baseline, I mean, in some cases, like for DFARS, for instance, if you don't have that baseline 110 controls set for your company for DFARS, they'll shut you down. Government will come in and just be like, this project can no longer bill the customer until this has been rectified. And so that's a pretty big deal, especially when you have more than one person that's billing a project. So that's the baseline. And I think typically people have seen baselines before. So a guideline is usually, I remember a guideline, and you may as well, as a recommendation. That's just a really simple way for us to remember that. It's recommendations on actions or ways that we can operate. So it's not something that we have to do. It's just the recommendations. And finally here, the procedure is a step-by-step, detailed task for accomplishing whatever you're setting out to do, like a goal. I remember one of the first things that I did when I was working at Raymond James Financial is my boss, he says to me, I'd like you to make a procedural document on how to make a copy. And I kind of looked at him, I was just like, you don't know how to make a copy? He's like, no, that's not the point. He's like, I want you to learn how to be how to do documentation and subsequently create this procedural document. And so, I go and figure out the copy machine, and I come back with like 2 or 3 paragraphs, just saying, push the button, do this, do that, and it's like 1 page. And boy, he ripped that thing apart. He said, "Where's the pictures? Where's the little light bulbs with the notes on it?" And, that's not a detailed step-by-step way to make a copy. And even though that was a simple task, I failed miserably on it as my first procedural document. And so, these are things, these 5 terms here, I'd be surprised if you didn't see every one of these on the exam. Now, these other ones over here, maybe not, but for your own personal enrichment, you may be interested in these. Jennifer, what do you think an acquisition means? Okay. Thank you, Captain Obvious. Usually in a governance of security, this can mean a couple of different things, right? Especially in an organizational process. Usually if it's a business, let's say one of those big businesses out there wants to purchase a smaller company, they'll do a couple of different things. They'll either acquire the company, or they'll maybe have a merger with the company. So there'll be what typically in the investment banking world is called a M&A event, a merger or an acquisition. And typically you find out how the company is organized in a way that hopefully if they don't have security already in their organizational processes, you can come in and maybe acquire that as a service, but also you could, in the same context, it doesn't necessarily need to just be for business, just like you were saying, the acquisition of different security software or systems or hardware can come into play if it's within your budget as well. So you can actually govern security by acquiring things. You don't have to build it in-house. A divestiture is a big word that we saw recently with Google, probably 3 years ago, that they decided to break up the company and have a parent company called Alphabet. And so essentially that's what it means, is that to take a larger company or a large company and break it up into maybe subsidiaries. And all of that could get kind of wonky if you let the inmates lock their own doors there. And I'm using that metaphor on purpose with some of these financial people that are out there. It could get kind of wonky. So we have to keep eyes on that. And that's why we have a lot of governance that's out there in forms of policy. And so these are things that you may not see on the exam, but it's good to just know just in case. So what do we do in order to try to make sure that we can keep our good governance or good cyber hygiene alive? Well, we have these different committees that you may be put into place within your organization. And so inside of typically what is called an information systems risk management policy, usually you'll see it, and there's a number of different ways that you'll see, but it's typically an information systems risk management, or an ISRM. And inside of that, the plan, the information system risk management plan, there will be a bunch of different ways that we can manage risk. One of them would be Information Systems Security Steering Committee. And so these are people like us that are security professionals that have our ear to the ground, that oftentimes will produce things like a security profile of the company, maybe do some sort of threat assessment, and you bring the findings to make sure that we're keeping up with the Joneses. So anybody who is on the steering committee could potentially come back to the whole group and allow to have good conversations in place that says that, hey, we should do cost-effective security and implement some new widget that we saw out on Google, and maybe we should bring them in for a demo. But it's not all about that per se, because there needs to be a determination on what's going to be the acceptable risk and a whole lot of other different things. And so that comes into play throughout the life cycle of security management. And with any type of risk that is identified, we may need to figure out what roles people have within our organization. We're going to talk about those here in a second, like the senior manager and all those typical things. But with this risk management, usually someone either on an audit committee or inside the risk management plan or on the steering committee will come up with a way that what's typically referred to as framing the risk. And if you've done any RMF before, you probably have seen something like this, framing the risk. And so typically we can put a risk into a certain type of a category where we can say, what are the constraints that we're under? What are our priorities? Because it's a big risk, but it's a low priority for us. That helps us manage the risk. And then, what's the tolerance from that? And if from an audit perspective, from an audit committee perspective, that allows us to, if we're coming in and doing an assessment, that would allow us to look at what are these risks, how pertinent it is to their industry, to their organization. And it allows us to frame the risk, but also assess the risk, be able to see how we can respond or put in a control to the risk, and then be able to monitor the risk over the lifetime of the risk. And because of that, it allows us to really practice security through the continuous monitoring of security. And that's something that we have seen a significant amount of things come to life. Let me write that on here. The goal for any steering committee or any audit that comes out there should be to have continuous monitoring. And how can we constantly make sure that we're keeping up with that? Well, on the network or on the system side of the house, we can certainly do that through having tools. But on the people side of the house, one thing that sucks for every one of us is the security awareness. And so to constantly make sure that people are up to date on whatever the recent threats are, we'll periodically have them sit through some sort of security awareness training. If you have a government clearance, you probably know that is one type of frequency. If it's on the commercial side, maybe it's once a year. Those are the certain things that we look at. But another example, in addition to the first three here, is any type of a policy that you may put in place may have what's called a EULA. A EULA. What's that stand for? Anybody? All right. End user level agreement or end user license agreement. Because one of the things that we're going to probably uncover as we're going through and maybe doing an audit on your organization is, has anyone put any version of Windows on any network that you have that is not properly keyed? Does it have the proper keys, or is it pirated? And you'd be surprised, maybe not at your guys' organization, but a lot of organizations, especially mom and pop shops, we go in and we do see quite a bit of unlicensed things that are out there, and you got to ding people on that. So keep that in mind whenever you're going through and taking a look at it. But we mentioned before that there's one approach that we must do, and that is to get senior management's buy-in. So it's a top-down approach, meaning that if you know your organizational structure, you know who Barney Big Dog is that you have to go to get the money. And typically, it works in a fashion of what is the asset and what are the vulnerabilities to that asset. How can we protect the information in that asset? And then what are the processes that we currently have in place to protect that information? And because of that, there's a lot of things that are in or around these topics right here, including, but not limited to, some of the roles that these people have to play would be a concept like, this keeps going forward here. I don't want it to. Some concepts that are like threat modeling and being able to perform a threat model on someone. Has anybody ever done that before? Anybody ever done a threat model? So Microsoft makes a pretty cool tool. But you basically, if you've never done this before, you try to outline your system and then figure out what are going to be some of the adverse effects to that particular asset that you're looking to potentially compromise. So you put on the hat of a bad guy, and you can perform what's called a threat model or threat assessment. And by doing that, typically you can go out and figure what are some of the newest vulnerabilities that are out there that we could use to exploit. And what does that mean if we were to exploit it? So let me write that on here. Threat modeling to uncover potential vulnerabilities. And that may be somebody like, your manager directs you to, as a security professional, you go out and do a threat model. You're looking at different vulnerabilities. You're also looking at the information, right? And the data. And specifically, what are we doing to protect the data at rest, when it's in motion, and any type of way that we are using the information. I'm gonna figure it out. Data and use. So this would be data at rest, data in motion, and data in use. And so the knowing what the information is doing at each one of these states is super important. We're going to talk about that probably tomorrow when we jump into asset security, because that's a big deal. That's a big deal. How the data is stored, how it's processed. And those are decisions that typically people like the data owner within your organization might make. So that person could be somebody who's in charge of a business unit who says, hey, I want it to look this way, maybe encrypted, full disk encryption. And then they would task the custodian to actually go through and do the work. That's the person that actually does the work or implements the items that the data owner wants you to implement. Whereas the user would be the consumer of a resource. And many times we will maybe wear an alternate hat of someone who comes in, lifts up the hood, and looks for those baseline. We just talked about this, right? Looks for baseline security mechanisms in place. And, you know, from an auditor's perspective, or even a security professional, right? Because we're probably, many of us in this boot camp are one of those two people. We're either security engineer or security professional, maybe you're a security manager, or maybe it's your job to come in as an auditor and check that out. Well, we don't just want to go and start making up security through obscurity based off of, you know, our background. We're going to lean on frameworks, and the frameworks that we lean on are ones that are very popular. Unfortunately, for it sounded like most of you guys online right here, unfortunately, many of you are deep in the bowels of the Nist 800 series. So that's kind of, you know, you have your tunnel vision on and you're looking at that specifically, right? But the good news is from that Nist 800 series comes the Nist cybersecurity framework, the CSF, also the RMF, the DFARS, and now the CMMC come to fruition for that. But any of these derivative frameworks as well. And when we look at the derivative frameworks, that's very important because these security frameworks really teach us what we need to do to practice good security. What is best practice in the industry? And many of them, if you're looking to, remember I said the security professional or the auditor, somebody coming in and doing an assessment, you know, many of these, it's very similar in the way that they're orchestrated and carried out. So if you have a good understanding of the RMF, you know, taking a look at the controls for IT that is published by an organization called ISACA. I mean, this is going to be something you're going to look at. You're going to be like, oh, okay, that kind of makes sense. Now, that's not DoD specific, but yeah, okay, I can see where they're going with that. And the same thing comes into play for managing security or managing information systems. That is the ISO 27000 series. But essentially, all of these are going to have something in common where, you know, you need to develop a number of different things. And one of them is going to be risk management policy. Probably have developed a risk management team, or as Ryan was saying earlier, that CERT, right, the incident response team would be helpful as well. And usually, you know, those Tiger teams come in handy. It'll teach you, these frameworks will teach you how to identify any company assets that need to be assessed, and basically give you the guidance of, hey, this is where I need to be, not only because I may be audited down the road, but because I'm doing my due diligence. I'm doing the right thing. I can come in, I identify these assets, but then also I need to calculate a value of those assets, because these things that are in my project aren't cheap. And then once I calculate that value, I can figure out through doing like a threat model, I can figure out the vulnerabilities and threats that are associated with each of those assets. And then based off of whatever framework I'm using, I implement a methodology that allows me to monitor continuously those assets. So from a risk management perspective, and managing risk and security within an organization, you pick a framework. That's going to be the methodology. And then you come up with a policy. You get that team together of people. You're able to identify the assets, calculate the value, figure out what those threats and vulnerabilities are to that. And then at some point down the road, you're probably going to be assessed. And that's typically what we see in the business. Any questions on that?
On the test, is it more of a high level of all of them?
That's a great question. So on the test, it won't get deep into the bowels of RMF. Like 830 is this, 853 is this. It won't get into that. It'll be at a high level for each of these. And so if you could write 2 sentences, 7 words in each sentence about each one of these frameworks, that's what you need to know.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm. So when we're jumping in and talking about how we're going to do this, how we're going to implement our security within our organization, usually you'll see people talk about these 2 keywords right here: due care and due diligence. And I say that because a lot of times people use them interchangeably. Usually due diligence, the double D here, usually that is what we use when we talk about people that are leaders, like you guys, managers within our organization. Maybe we're trying to adhere to any laws that are out there, possibly looking for any regulations. So what we'll do is we'll try to practice due diligence. And what typically that means here is did you do everything in your power to try to prevent a bad thing from happening? And the reason why we as security professionals typically get paid a little bit more is because we have a lot of responsibility. If somebody is trusting us to protect their assets, then I think how apropos is there anything that could be more relevant than to us as leaders and adhering to laws or regulations to say, we have tried to prevent everything that we possibly can from happening to the system. And if it's really a gut check, right? For us as leaders within our organization, if we feel like we have, then it's up to somebody else to come in and tell us we suck. And typically they will. But most of the time, once we find that bad thing, the other side of the coin is, what are we doing to correct it? So do care, on the other hand, did we take precautions to try to be reasonable? To implement reasonable controls that another competent person would use in the same situation. And so for some reason, I always think of Honest Abe. And, we all know the 7 years ago that our fathers granted forth this great. Oh, actually, he doesn't have a mustache, right? He doesn't have a mustache. But the Honest Abe approach. Typically, what we'll hear people say is the prudent man approach, or prudent woman approach. Prudent man approach. Now, why do I say that? Well, it's typically what we usually will see here is why is that important for me to mention this prudent man approach? Well, it is important because usually this is what's the right thing to do. What's the right thing to do? If you are in charge of your project or your program or security, and you know that there are laws that says that you have to do things, or there are regulations that say you must protect this, that, and the other thing, then you better be practicing due diligence within your practice of security to prevent a bad thing from happening. Now, let's say here, and a good analogy is, let's say you spill water on the floor. Well, being able to detect it says, oh, hey, there's water right there. So you've told somebody that, hey, be careful, there's water right there, and maybe even point to it. You're practicing due diligence. One could argue you'd be practicing due diligence. Whereas if you went and got the mop or some paper towels because you saw it right there, you could say that you're actually practicing due care at that point. And so typically that's the delta that we see between these two. Are you actually practicing due care? Are you taking precautions that a reasonable person would do or would use? Are you taking an Honest Abe approach or the prudent man approach? I would say with high level of confidence, both of these terms will be on the exam. high level of confidence. All right, hold on. I got a note here. It says, okay, without management support, resources, funds, and time, it would result in bad plans that may give a false sense of security. Failure to use these plans usually means a failure in management's understanding and a lack of due care responsibilities. Due diligence is normally associated with leaders, laws, and regulations. Due care is normally applicable to everyone and could be used to show negligence. It's a key legal term right there, negligence. All right, so there's all sorts of really interesting things that we need to do for protecting those assets. We mentioned those assets. And really, what we typically hear people in our industry say is we want to practice what's called a defense in depth approach. Defense in depth. Or sometimes you'll hear people talk about a layered security approach. And that layered security approach really is analogous to what we typically will say is the onion. And the onion, if we just draw an onion here and we cut it in half, well, the most pungent part would be at the core, and that's typically what we're trying to protect in our metaphor here, right? We're trying to protect data within our organization. That's typically the key resource that we have in whatever fashion that we have, whether it's, you know, in target telemetry, if it's, you know, a weapon system, if we're developing the next coolest thing for helicopters, whatever, right? We're protecting healthcare information. So data is typically at the core of this onion layered defense in depth approach, where near the core, we will put typically very technical controls near the core. We spend a lot of money trying to protect that, like, you know, biometrics, encryption, those kind of things. And then as we spatially diffuse from the center here in a dendritic-like fashion, usually the less technical, more administrative, like policies, procedures, gates, guards, and guns, physical security controls, will be around the periphery, anything near the outside. So it's more costly near the middle. So in this center here, it'll be super expensive. And then as we move to the periphery, it'll be less expensive. And that's because, you know, there may be things for legal and regulatory issues, maybe privacy or compliance issues. So because of that, practicing the good cyber hygiene with the defense in depth approach really is best practice in our industry. But if you're not familiar with that, there are quite a few types of laws within implementation. What's the right thing to do? What's the wrong thing to do? And we know a few of these. And in your book, there's actually a really good discussion about some of the religious laws across the world. Remember, this isn't just in the United States that this certification is offered. This is really a holistic approach for, you know, globally. And, you know, if you steal something, you may get your hand cut off. You guys probably heard that. You know, in some religious or customary, you know, there's certain things that men can do, certain things that women can do. There's a hybrid approach, but we're more familiar with the codified or codified civil or common law, which also may help us with the administrative or regulatory law. And because of that, we can have different things happen to us or be held responsible in civil court, but also criminal court as well. Now, what those types of things are specifically, you can go and read all about this in your book. You can go and look up the religious and mixed law things that I just briefly touched on in the last. You can go read all about that. But really, the types of common law are trying to show negligence and look to see who is liable. So that's really what we're trying to show here. And whether it's in civil court or criminal court, or if you violated some administrative law, that could then put you into criminal court, right? So for me, I always think about this right here. The juice is loose. So with O.J. Simpson, I remember him being tried for murder in criminal court, and he was proven not guilty in criminal court. So he didn't do prison time for murder. I don't even think they tried him criminally for anything. Well, then one of the families of one of the people came back and tried him in civil court for wrongful death, and he was shown as negligent and guilty in civil court. And usually that, in any case, means that you have to have a monetary payment or restitution that you have to pay out. And so, you can't have double jeopardy. And you'll see that whenever you go through and read parts of your book. So that's kind of an interesting case in itself. But if the glove don't fit, you must acquit, is the famous words there. And over here on the administrative side of the house, I think about Martha Stewart. And Martha Stewart, she was in charge of a publicly traded company that was doing very well. And I think that she owned stock in another company, but she heard that there were some, she may have a loss that's coming up. And because that there may be a loss coming up, she dumped a whole ton of stock. And there are regulatory laws in place that prevent people from doing that. And that's what happened in that case. Sure enough, she ended up having to go to the pokey for quite a little while. And those types of things happen. Just another one that I can think of is Elon Musk. This is probably about a year ago that he tweeted that he may end up taking, I think it was Tesla. He was thinking of taking Tesla back private. And immediately when he did that, the stock went, and all he did was a one sentence tweet, right? Well, the Security Exchange Commission came back and said, you can't do that. And I think it was a $20 million fine for Homeboy on that regard. One sentence cost you $20 million. But there are quite a bit of laws and regulations that you need to adhere to, and you need to keep those in mind. Let's take a look at some of those here on the next few slides. All right, so this first one, Sarbanes-Oxley. This one, first let me just take a step back here. Usually Usually we see this one on the exam. You'll see this one on the exam. Usually we'll see this one on the exam. So one of those three, you can bet on it that it's going to be on the exam. All right. So Sarbanes-Oxley, this was in 2002, and they typically won't ask you years or historical things on the exam. But this one specifically was just what I was talking about before, but a little bit more granular. And this one deals with cooking the books. So this makes sure with the SOX that people know that if you're cooking the books, it's a federal law that says that you can't do that. And executives will serve jail time if they're caught doing cooking the books. And if you're not familiar with that, cooking the books is fraudulent accounting practices, which is a no-no. One of the ones that you may be more familiar with is the Hipaa. And I think every time that I go to the doctor, I'm signing some form for Hipaa there. But this is all dealing typically with our PII and specifically with how a particular healthcare vendor is going to protect or share or not share our information. And this is probably the most popular one that people recognize right off the get-go is the Hipaa. So typically that's one that people know a little bit about. One of the most disgusting ones that I remember when it happened is this Graham Leach Bliley. And prior to this happening, anytime you would fill out a credit app, the credit companies could share your information carte blanche with anybody. Now, which it seems still kind of backwards to me, now they at least inform you. They must inform you who they're sharing your information. And give you a chance to opt out. Whereas to me, it seems like, well, I guess if it was to opt in, nobody would do that. So that's really the only way that a lot of these companies can share information. But at least now there's a provision in a law that tells that you actually have to communicate with people that you're getting ready to share their information. And because of that, Graham Leach Bliley was born. I think for me, probably the most disgusting one was this one up here, the Sarbanes-Oxley. Whenever that was brought to life was the time when WorldCom and Tyco, a lot of the executives were taking money, and I think that also happened recently. So it'll be interesting to see what happens with Hertz. Because of the pandemic, they had to go to Chapter 11 and file for bankruptcy. Chapter 11. But when they did, they paid off all the executives first instead of all the shareholders, which is not a way that you liquidate the company. So keep that in mind. But these three, typically you'll see on the exam. These two down here were provisional guidelines for computing and how to protect privacy information. Speaking of privacy here, if you're using credit cards, there's one that's the Payment Card Industry Data Security Standard that Visa, MasterCard, Discover, American Express all got in to try to take proactive steps to protect consumer data. Credit card transactions. And it's actually kind of interesting that by the beginning of this year, anybody that's accepting a credit card transaction is supposed to be using the chip now. So if you're still swiping, you go to a gas station or somebody, and they're still swiping, then they're probably using an old reader that doesn't have the chip. For whatever purposes they haven't upgraded. But most companies now have already updated and they're using the chip to make sure that they're protecting that credit card transaction. Fantastic chance you will see PCI DSS on the exam. Fantastic chance. Anybody ever gone through a PCI DSS audit? No? Very similar to any other type of audit, but there's 12 different requirements that you need for it. All right. So I feel like you guys seem to have a decent understanding of that. All right, let's jump ahead here, and I want to talk a little bit about these things and some of the intellectual property laws that you may see on the exam. What is, Ryan, what is intellectual property?
Somebody's thoughts.
Okay. So it could be a corporation, it could be an individual, and it depends on what type of intellectual property that we're talking about that really identifies what specifically needs to be protected. So in a lot of cases, many companies that are out there have this trade secret here. So this is typically a proprietary to a company and typically it's important to its survivability, a trade secret. You know, some of the examples that typically you'll hear from this is like the secret sauce, the Zaxby's secret sauce, or the Coca-Cola recipe, or the Pepsi recipe. So those are the KFC, the 12 blends of herbs and spices, right? Those are trade secrets. It can be source code. It could be source code. It could be a new type of math. It could be a program. It could be really anything. But the definition of it is it's proprietary to a company that is important for the survivability or profitability. So if that trade secret gets leaked, then ruh-roh, Reggie, they may actually be in trouble. Whereas a copyright law, this typically will protect, this will protect the right of the creator of the original work, protects the rights of the creator of the original work, and make sure that there is some check and balance as far as the distribution of it. So copyright, typically you see the C with a circle around it. Whereas a trademark is important because that is a type of intellectual property. And the actual definition of a trademark is that it's something that is used to try to protect any type of word, name, symbol, sound, shape, color, or a combination of all of those things. And so we actually have two trademarks here at Cyber Protects. We have the Got Cyber, which is a registered trademark. And then recently, we were approved for the Vulnerability Genius. So those are the two registered trademarks that we have. So there's a difference between the TM and the R. The TM means that you've applied for the trademark. The R means it's been approved. And then finally down here, we have this thing that's called a patent that many of us are familiar with. Anybody ever applied for a patent? Anybody have any patents? I get all sorts of people coming through here. So sometimes people have patents. All right. So typically these try to protect people or companies. So these protect people or companies by granting legal ownership to an idea or invention. So invention. Usually for the purposes of your exam, usually we'll see all four of these on the exam at some point or another. Now, they may embed it into certain questions. You may not have 4 questions. You may have 4 questions, but know these keywords: copyright, trademark, patent, because each one of them you will see again on your exam. Each one of them you will see on your exam. Okay. Anybody got any questions? Okay, that was more than 7 seconds. So, no is the answer to that. All right, so one of the reasons why I like this Sean Harris book is because in this book, and you guys can either follow along electronically or if you're here in person inside the book, they actually have these little blowout boxes here, which are kind of neat. So like the different types of standards, best practices, and frameworks, well, they have them broken down by specific components, like the security program development, enterprise architecture development, and then they break them down, the different frameworks for each one of them: COBIT, Nist, COSO, and then process management. And these are important because these little blowout things are important because it can help you study and just kind of reinforce things a little bit further. And so as you go through and make sure that you go through and do the homework tonight, one of the things is to try to speed read domain one, which is one of the things that's important for us to make sure everybody's on the same page. But I want to go and just talk about that very briefly to make sure. Ninja Cyber. Out here on the Ninja Cyber, again, I'll show it one more time. My expectations are that you're going to go through tonight. You're going to be like, yeah, I love this class. Yeah. Come out here. There's 2 homework that you're supposed to do. One is this one, where there'll be a little bit of work that needs to be done. You'll have to go through and do that. Now, you may take a look at this, define the following, and you're just like, holy cow, this is going to be a lot of work. My hope is that you will put 3 to 5 words only, maybe 7 at tops for each one of these, okay? Don't go in and write a dissertation for each one of these. That's not what the intent is. The intent's not to do busy work. It's just to make sure that you're brushing off the cobwebs with a lot of these terms. For day one, that's the first part. The second part is this one right here, security and risk management, the defense in depth, going through compliance and operational security, network hardening. This is a drag and drop right here where you write in the words from over here over to there. So you know, these shouldn't be too difficult. It's just going to take you a little bit of time to do it. So I would encourage you to make sure that you set aside at least an hour, maybe even 2 this evening to go through and do the homework. In addition to that, I would love to have you go through and read the domain 1 as well. Okay? That's what I would love to have you do for homework tonight. And we'll make sure that we follow it up with a nice email there for you. So let me just ask a few questions here, because I know you guys are, one of 2 things are happening. Either the food coma is sitting in from after lunch and you've fallen asleep already, which in person, that would be a little bit more difficult to do. But some people do it. Some people do it. Or you're like, you know what? This is fantastic. I love this guy. So either way, we're okay with either one. So let's go through and let me just ask you a few questions here. Let's see if you can get them. Okay, I'm gonna put them into the chat window. So you guys here saw that the network came back on a little while ago. I'm gonna put it into the chat window. We'll see who's awake. Yeah, it looks like Brandon gave the answer out to everybody. Make sure you're doing it privately. So CIA is what we were looking for there. Yeah, confidentiality, integrity, and availability. Good, good. All right, what about this right here? Yep. Good, Brandon. Good, Jennifer. Good, Alicia. Good, Doug. Good, Amos. Yeah. We were looking for Vulnerability there. Vulnerability. Good. How about this one? Right here. All right, that one's actually a threat. But for you guys that just answered that other word here, guessed it. This next one may be more in your wheelhouse. That is correct. Yes. Good. Yes. Yes, that's right. Good. All right. So yeah, that was a risk. How about this next one here? It's a little bit more difficult. It's close. It's a big word. Starts with a C. Yes, that is correct. Nope. Not control. Good, Doug. Usually by 15, 17 seconds means that somebody could copy and paste it and put it into Dr. Google. So countermeasure was what I was looking for there. No, I didn't. I know I wasn't accusing you of that, but that's why I was saying that it's time for me to give the answer rather than accusing anybody, if that makes sense. All right. Yeah, that's countermeasure. It is also called a safeguard or control. It mitigates the risk. Good. All right. How about this guy? This one's a little bit straightforward. Good. Good job, Ryan. Good, Alicia. Good, Jennifer. Good, Brandon. Now, yeah, that one is a control. Can be administrative, technical, or physical, and it can provide deterrent, preventive, detective, corrective, and recovery protection. So this is actually, this next one is actually a blank. So a blank control is an alternative control that's put into place because of financial or business functionality reasons. So what kind of control? Alternative control. No, no, that's not it, Amos. That's very close. Very close, Ryan. I'm not sure about the spelling there. Yes. Good, Doug. Anybody else? So for that one, I was looking for compensating control. Compensating control. So it's an alternative type of control that's implemented like a supplemental control, or you have to give up something. So this next one, you'll probably get it tomorrow when I ask it again, but you may not get it right now. So this is one of the frameworks that we've reviewed. And there's some keywords in there that should lead the horse to water. So in this definition, there's keywords in there that should lead it to water. Good. Yep. Both of you guys. Good. See how when you spell it out? Yes, Alicia. Good. See how when you spell it out, it kind of just falls right into it? Nope, not the Common Core. That's funny though. All right, so that one, control objectives for IT, is COBIT. Control objectives for IT. When I just said that though, it sounded like COVID, didn't it? COBIT. Control objectives for IT. So easy way to remember that. Or I think it is. All right, this is a good one here. This next one. The ISO, I forget what IEC means, but it's a series that was derived. I think we had a question on this one earlier. Yep, that's right. Good, Jennifer. Yep, Amos, good. Yes, Brandon, good. All right, so that one we were looking for there is 27,000 series. 27,000 series. That's international best practices on how to develop and maintain a security program. Now, this next one, I'm not as familiar. I mean, I could answer a test question on it, but personally, I've never had to practice this right here. A set of best practices for IT service management. Service management. Now, we have had people ask us if we can train people on that. Yeah, that's right, Brandon. But I just don't feel like that's in my wheelhouse. I'm not interested in that. No, that's not it. Brandon, have you had training on that? Yep, I figured. People that have been through the training typically answer that right away, because it's for IT service management, and it's the ITIL. ITIL. And you'll see that tonight on your homework. Yeah, that's right, Amos. Good. You'll see the ITIL on there. All right, what about this next one here? This is actually something that I have used before, and I'll let it kind of percolate for about 6 or 7 seconds before I give you a clue. Blank blank is used to identify defects and processes so that the processes can be improved upon. I'll give you a hint here. Yep. Without the first word.
Yeah.
But yeah, that's right. All right, so that one is blank blank is used to identify defects and processes so that the processes can be improved upon. I'm sure you got, every one of you guys has probably heard of it before. Six Sigma. So that's what Six Sigma does, is identifies defects and then it figures out what can we do to try to fix it moving forward. All right, this next one here is one that I know the DoD uses, primarily for improvement on not only documentation, but software. Improvement on documentation and software. And there's a key word in there, maturity model. 2 keywords there. No, but yes, it's not that. But you're in the ballpark. You are close, but not the last letter of the acronym. You're in the ballpark. No. There's one more letter. It's developed by Carnegie Mellon. It's a maturity model. Maturity model. Usually you see it for like configuration management, documentation, you know, how can we make things better? At SED, we received, for one of the projects I supported a while back, we received a letter or level 4 of this. But we weren't able to keep it, so we went back down to level 3. There's 5 different levels, and it is the CMMI is what we were looking for there. CMMI. And we'll jump into these throughout the rest of the week. I'm just trying to make sure that I don't miss anything. This one, I mean, I'd be surprised if anybody misses this next one here. Yep. 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 No, that's not it. That was close though. Yeah, the Nist 800 series. So the Nist 800, and specifically that one would be the 853, which that's probably the only one in the Nist series that's going to be on your exam. And you may only have one question on that. You may. I think personally they try to stay away from that because they don't want people to think that it's going to be a United States government test. If you're interested in getting certified on the Nist 800 series, look at the ISC squared CAP, Certification and Accreditation Professional. That's a pretty good one for that. But you may only see one. You'll either see one on the Nist, COBIT, 27,000, and maybe a couple of others, but those are typically you just see one question on that. All right, how about about this? There's one key word in there that should give it away. Yep. Yep. Good. 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 That's right. Haven't seen a wrong answer yet. Good, Brandon. Good, Ryan. Good, Alicia. Good, Jennifer. All right, so what we were looking for there is a patent grants ownership. Patent grants ownership and enables that owner to legally enforce his or her rights to exclude others from using the invention covered by it. All right, what about this next one here? Blank protects the expression of ideas rather than the ideas themselves. That's right, Alicia. Good. No. Hold that off, though. That's next. Yeah, I mean, you know, but yeah, no, but yeah, right, right. It's that's too high. You got to come up. You got to come down a level. But Ryan, you're in the ballpark. Yes, Brandon. No. All right. So for that one, that is the copyright protects the expression of ideas rather than the ideas themselves. Copyright does. Copyright. Okay. Let's keep on going here. Let's see. Oh, this is a good one. This protects words, names, product shapes, symbols, colors, or combination of those items to identify products or company. Yep. Jennifer, good. Brandon, good. Alicia, good. Amos, no. Yes. Ryan, good job. All right. So trademarks protect all of those different things. Got cyber? All right. This next one, a couple of you have already answered for previous questions, but boom, blank, blank, 2 words, are deemed proprietary to a company and often include information that provides a competitive edge. The information is protected as long as the owner takes the necessary protective actions. Yes, yes, both of you guys. Good. Yep, good. Fantastic. Good job, Alicia. Good job, Brandon. Yeah, so what we were looking for there is blank blank is trade secrets there, trade secrets. All right, how about this one? This is a good one. Yes, good, good. You guys are the first two to chime in both times. I don't know. That's okay. It's okay that you spelled it wrong. I mean, you even spelt wrong. Yes, Brandon, good. OMG. That's funny. All right. Yeah. So what I was looking for there, detailed step by step, would be a procedure, right? What about this right here? Blank are documents that outline rules that are compulsory in nature. Rules. No. Close though. Jennifer, yes. Good job. Amos, yes. Alicia, no. They support the organization's security policy. I think I mentioned something when we were covering that, but I said that you take the policy and you grab a standard, and then it kind of gives the crutch of the support for the organizational's. Did I just give you the answer? I mean, I think I did. Sorry. I meant to say blank instead of standard there, but standard is the answer. All right. What is a minimum level of security? Just go ahead and put it into the chat. What's a minimum level of security? Good. 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 Good job, Ryan. Minimum level of security is what? You can also step on it underneath the hoop in basketball. All right. So minimum level of security is a baseline. Baseline is minimum level of security. What about this one? What's a recommendation and general approach that provides advice and flexibility? What is that? Good. 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 Yes. Amos, no. Yes, that is correct. Good. Yeah, we were looking for guideline or guidelines there. Good. All right, last one here. This is a, should be pretty straight. Security management should work from the blank blank. Yeah, 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 yeah. I don't think there's any. Let's see. I mean, I get it pretty quick if they know it. Yes, Brandon, good. So we were looking for top-down approach. Top-down approach there. Security management should trickle down from the top managers down to you, the peon, underneath. All right. So I think that this is probably, what time are we at? 3:41. Okay, this is probably a good place to stop, knowing that you have a little bit of homework tonight, and I don't want you to hate me for the rest of the week, and I want to give you a chance to actually complete the homework. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to turn you loose here with the intent that please read chapter 1 and then go into the Cyber Ninja and do the homework for day 1 and homework for day 1. So that's what I want you to do. Is go in and do the homework, the Cyber Ninja, but also read chapter 1, because we're going to have a review tomorrow morning to give you, for me to see who actually did it and who didn't do it. Once you get done with it, I don't need you to print it out and bring it to me. You can just email it to me, and we'll kind of go from there. Anybody online or in person have any questions at all? Yeah, yeah. What did I write right there? I said chapter. Do they call them chapters in this book, or is it a domain? Okay, yeah. So read chapter 1. That's what I meant. Read chapter 1. Yes. Thank you for the clarification. Okay, that's it. That's all I got for today. We're going to let you out about 17 minutes early, give you a chance to get started on some of this stuff. Tomorrow, a lot of the same. We'll go through and pepper you with some goodness. Until then, if you have any questions, shoot me an email. I'll put my email in the chat, and you may already have it, but if not, then that's the email address you can reach me on. We'll go from there. So see you tomorrow morning at 08:30. Tomorrow morning at 08:30.